Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Nice to see all of your faces on this gloomy day. Appreciate your coming out and braving the weather. Hopefully it won't get too bad while we're here. Most of the terrible weather is quite south of us, but thank you for being here. Just as a little reminder, if your volume on your cell phone is on, you might want to turn that down or turn off any of your, what do you call those things that make noises, you know, your dings and your all of these things. I know that's always an issue for me as well. But I am so thrilled to see all of you here. You know, I was thinking it was about 3 weeks ago or so, we lost the great actor, James Earl Jones. And when I think of him, my favorite movie of his is, you could probably guess. No. Anybody else have a guess? They had it playing like all day and all night for like 2 days on some channel. Nope. Thank you, Field of Dreams. So as soon as I started watching Field of Dreams again, the thought that went through my head is the most famous line, at least in my opinion, that came out of that movie, which was, if you build it, they will come. Well, at Brain Injury Services, BIS, we have been building this event for quite a long time. Our staff team, along with some great support from our friends at Ward Circle Strategies, has put a lot of thought into what's going to take place here today in this room. And we're all very excited about it. I'm Donna Meltzer. I'm the CEO of Brain Injury Services, and today we are just so excited to host this opportunity to bring you all together. All of you who are here are thought leaders, experts, self-advocates, family members, and we know you are here today to engage with us in an open dialogue about concussion and its impact on children and adults in Northern Virginia and beyond. At Brain Injury Services, we are committed to transforming and empowering the lives of individuals with brain injuries through our free services and programs. In our daily work, we see many clients who have experienced one or more concussions, and we have seen the challenge it has presented them as they work to rebuild their lives. It seems like we hear more and more about concussion on the news these days. I think there's been several reports just in the last week. And in fact, yesterday I was driving home from work and I guess I was coming from a different direction in my own neighborhood than I typically do. And I looked off to the right at what's always been, or for a number of years has been, a MedStar clinic. And now it says Concussion Clinic in big red letters. And I thought, wow, either that's brand new or I just haven't driven this direction in a while and stuck in traffic there. But it just tells me how much more prevalent concussion either is or seems to be, or maybe it's not more prevalent. We'll dig into that discussion today. But maybe it's just that we know more. We're talking about it more and we are addressing it more. Here at BIS, we have really gotten into this conversation, and we thank our partners who have been with us in this, United Healthcare. Thank you very much for your support of today's conversation, and Wegmans as well. The prevalence of head injuries does seem to be increasing, despite our knowledge of the causes of concussion. And we have found this perplexing. And so late last winter, BIS conducted a poll of adults in Northern Virginia to learn more about what people know and think about brain injury. From that poll, we learned some very interesting information about what people think about concussion. I want to share 4 different stats with you. Close to half, about 43% of Northern Virginia surveyed said they don't know how to support a loved one after brain injury. That's a pretty high percentage. 2/3, 67%, believe sports culture makes it acceptable to ignore concussions. That may or may not be true. We'll dig into that one today as well. But it's a perception, and that means it's something we need to address. More than 3/4, or 78% of adults, said that they would hesitate to tell employers that they have had a concussion. This is something else we're going to be talking about here today. And what do you do if you've experienced a concussion. More than 70% said that they are unaware of free local services like BIS that can aid in their recovery. That's frustrating to us as well, because we want everyone to know that here in Northern Virginia, BIS is here to help. This poll data got us thinking and talking with a variety of individuals across our area and spurred the concept that resulted in today's event. Our goal today is to spur open discussion and dialogue about concussion and how we can all work together to help people recognize, respond, recover, and return to school, work, and play after concussion. Today, we will share thoughts, ideas, and resources to hopefully identify what we already know, information we already have access to, and to identify what we don't know or may need more information or resources on. We will hear today from some national experts and local leaders who are working to change the outcome of concussion through changes in policy, testing, research, and knowledge and information sharing. We will begin this morning with our keynote address by Dr. Julie Harbauer-Krupa of the CDC, and then we will hear from a panel of folks working across different sectors in our local communities. We will break into small groups for some brainstorming. Yes, pun intended, brainstorming. And then we will reconvene as a whole to share what we discussed and what we learned. So, warning, if you're in one of these small groups, one of you from each group is going to have to volunteer to come back to this room with a report out so that we can hear and share notes and ideas that happen across all 4 of our breakout sessions. I want to note that some of what we may hear from our panel of experts might seem controversial to you. There are many differences of opinion right now on a variety of thoughts regarding concussion. Protocols are continuously changing. Research brings new ideas and debunks older myths, and baseline testing has become one of the most debated topics in the concussion recovery discussion. We carefully considered who should be a part of our panel and ultimately determined that excluding any voices from those working with good intention to limit concussion and improve concussion recovery would limit the discussion we were looking to have today. Hearing how baseline testing is not only informing research about concussion, but also about other brain diseases such as Alzheimer's and other dementias, made it important for us to have this open conversation today. Every concussion and recovery journey is unique, and having all perspectives is essential. And today we want to fully engage in diversity of thought. Your thoughts matter. Part of the summit's goal is to address conflicting information to help us provide clear, reliable information and resources for those who need it the most. As we proceed through the day, I encourage everyone to listen, ask questions, and engage in discussions to help us better inform and support our community. Through this diversity of thought, we can ensure that all, from athletes and healthcare providers to educators and employers, have the tools needed to navigate the complex path of concussion recovery. So, let us start with a story, because a story always paints a really good picture, doesn't it? We had hoped today that we would have a BIS client able to come and tell his own story. His name is Ken Israel. Unfortunately, he has been struggling with some health issues and was not able to come today. However, he has agreed to allow Michelle Thien, BIS's Director of Volunteer Programs, to share his story on his behalf. Michelle?
Good morning. I have primed myself with 2 cups of coffee so I can begin to do justice to Ken's story. I wish he was here to share, but as you all know, the journey with brain injury is a lot of ups and downs. So I will do my best to share in the manner in which he would. Last summer, I was driving on I-66 when the world lost its 3-dimensionality and appeared as a flattened image projected onto the screen of my windshield. Then suddenly it seemed like I was driving backwards and forwards simultaneously. The optical illusion is hard to describe. Have you ever had a car pull out beside you while parked and felt a moment of vertigo as if moving? My brain had abruptly started misinterpreting conflicting visual meanings. It was terrifying, but it wasn't the first surreal experience I had had. This was 4 years into concussion recovery. On June 30th, 2019, I struck my head against a wooden beam overhanging the staircase to my basement apartment. I thought that I was okay after that, but over the next couple of days, I became so dizzy I could hardly walk. I developed excruciating migraines, and I couldn't remember the names of my coworkers. I was diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. Unfortunately, I received improper treatment early on. My first doctors gave me a few weeks of half days at work, and then when my symptoms improved, advised that I could return to life as normal. This sounded great to me because I wanted to get back to my life. I had been an active person. I was a successful marketing writer living in DC. I loved hiking the Billy Goat Trail, and I'd recently traveled to Iceland. And I was revising the novel that I had written in grad school. But I wasn't given a plan at all for return to work or return to physical activity. So when I went back to work full-time, guess what happened? All those symptoms returned full-blown. This was because I was overloading a brain that was still healing. When I told my doctors this, they gave me a psych referral. I was scared and I was confused because, after all, I could not work because of my symptoms. When the post-concussion headaches returned, they never went away. What are these like? It feels like a razor-sharp wire of pain being dragged back and forth through my brain, as well as hypersensitivity to light, sound, and even touch. The intensity of the world turned up to an unbearable degree, as if my entire body were an exposed nerve. I was also left with visual processing impairments. There is nothing wrong with my eyesight, but my eyes couldn't work in a coordinated fashion, and my brain has trouble fusing the image from each eye into a three-dimensional whole. When your brain is focused on keeping the world together, there is less attention available to comprehend what you're seeing, so I was confused most of the time. I called the world I inhabited the upside down. After the injury, nothing at all made sense to me. I was used to my mind chattering away, but now it was seized by a lunar blankness. I remember chopping vegetables one evening while repeating to myself, "Don't cut your finger, don't cut your finger," because I couldn't get that the vegetables and my flesh were two different things. I knew I needed help. Eventually, I found a physiatrist at National Rehab Hospital who understood concussions, and he put together a coordinated treatment plan. I desperately wanted my life back, so I hit my treatment regimen hard. PT, OT, vision therapy, headache, medicine. The pain was my primary concern. I was never not in pain. All day, every day. Everything worsened the headaches. Screens, noise, exercise, sunlight, just thinking hurt. Sometimes so severely that I lay in bed thrashing and screaming for days on end. I tried anti-seizure medications, injectable CGRP inhibitors fresh off the FDA approval list, beta blockers, triptans, and Botox. After I exhausted the prescription medications available for neurological pain, I visited the Jefferson Headache Center in Philadelphia. I spent a week inpatient receiving aggressive drugs via a PICC line catheter strung over my heart like a chandelier. The high-dose lidocaine made me hallucinate. One memorable experience involved playing poker on a Spanish galleon with Tim Roth for rather dire stakes, but to my credit, I seemed to be winning. Ultimately, the infusions were not as successful as my imaginary poker game. The pain didn't budge. Because everything seemed to make the pain worse, I started avoiding everything. I learned later that by doing this, I was training my mind to always feel unsafe and to be hypervigilant to any trigger. This, in turn, increased my pain. In trying to get my life back, I became a full-time patient. Doctors were treating my symptoms, but no one could tell me, what do I do now that grocery shopping takes everything that I have? Or what do I do if I can't work or go hiking or read or do the things that make me me? I needed help with very basic things, everyday life things, like doing laundry or cooking, which were now overwhelming to me. A vision therapist explained the difficulty I had fusing visual information like this. He said, your problem is that you're having a hard time holding on to the world. 2 years after my injury, I lost my housing. I moved in with family in Virginia. Here, a cognitive rehab psychologist referred me to the COMPASS program at Brain Injury Services. What I found at BIS was an answer to the question, how do you live with a brain injury? Stacy, my OT at COMPASS, helped me learn practical skills to improve my day-to-day functioning. She walked me through accessibility features on my computer and phone and helped me modify my work environment. With the help of COMPASS strategies and assistive technology, I was able to return to computer work. We also worked on improving my ability to tolerate sunlight so that I could get outdoors again. And I tried out numerous informational resources and apps. These strategies helped me translate the gains that I was making from medical treatments to real-world improvements in my life. Along the way, I found a community in support groups, the PALS program, and recently the ADAPT Clubhouse, who understood exactly what I was going through. This community helped me process and accept the extreme life change of chronic traumatic brain injury. Acceptance would be an important part of my recovery. While volunteering with the Speakers Bureau, I undertook the profound experience of putting my own story down on paper. It has been incredibly empowering working with Michelle, Katie, and Andrew to use my story to help others understand what it's like to live with a brain injury. Pursuing a return to work plan with my VOC rehab team led to an opportunity to work with Andrew, creating marketing materials for BIS. Succeeding in this project has been so important to rebuilding my confidence in my writing ability and reinforcing my identity as a professional writer, benefits that I have applied to my return to work. While my first foray into full-time employment didn't result in a long-term job, it was successful because I learned to advocate for myself, and I discovered that I can perform at a high level in a professional communication role. I always felt supported by my case manager, Natasha. During this process, my job coach, Bob, helped me build my resume, search open positions, and practice interviewing. Later, when my employer insisted I take on a much heavier workload than they had initially advertised, Bob helped me to clearly communicate what I could and could not do. My BIS team and community of survivors have motivated me to keep growing and explore creative recovery solutions. For example, here's how I started reading again. I couldn't read books at first because the visual processing effort triggered debilitating pain. So I started reading cartoons. I got out my old Calvin and Hobbes books and read 3 panels. The short text and pictorial cues made reading easier, and they're fun and funny, so it served as exposure therapy. Later, I'd learn in pain reprocessing therapy that what I was doing was giving myself a corrective experience. This is how pain reprocessing worked for me. I had learned to associate reading with pain, and so I feared reading. Fear put my nervous system on high alert, which intensified my pain, which created more fear, sustaining a feedback loop. By exposing myself gradually while inducing feelings of safety, I began to correct my body's response to safe things like reading and sunlight, and to pain itself. I finished a book of Calvin and Hobbes and then a second. Then I moved on to graphic novels, And from there, I started short books written in vignettes. My recovery community encouraged me to celebrate the victories, big and small. The first book I was able to read, The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. The first hiking trail loop I was able to walk, I celebrated as well. Recently, I told my story to Fairfax County and BIS leadership, supporters, and clients at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the ADAPT Clubhouse. Delivering a public speech and socializing for 3 hours without crashing afterwards marked a significant milestone in my recovery, as did my participation in the BIS Assistive Technology Showcase. With accomplishments like these, I'm optimistic about my goals of returning to full-time work, living independently, and inspiring others with my story. I'm grateful for the continuing support of BIS, because learning to live with brain injury takes years, and reversals come out of nowhere. The sensation of traveling backward and forward simultaneously on 66 shook me, but I took action and found a solution. I'm grateful for my treatment team, my BIS team, and my fellow survivors on whom I rely to keep moving forward.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing Ken's story. Numerous people have heard Ken's story, and we find that people really relate to it. You know, some people acquire concussion, brain injury through sports, some through a car accident, something monumental. Ken's story is kind of like every person's story, right? He was just in his own home, walking downstairs, and hit his head. It's the kind of thing that resonates with us to say, this could happen to me. And so this story, with its beautiful outcome, I think from hearing the words that you read so beautifully, Michelle, that Ken wrote, shows us that the writer in him didn't go away despite the brain injury. It took time for that brain to heal and for him to be able to put those words on paper. And I know, Michelle, he got a lot of support from you and other staff, but it shows you what recovery can look like when it's done properly. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, we are now going to hear from our keynote speaker. I am excited to introduce Dr. Julie Harbauer-Krupa. Julie is a health scientist on the TBI Team Division of Unintentional Injury at the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control at the CDC. Her background is in child development, clinical rehabilitation, and rehabilitation research, with experience in clinical program development, academic teaching, and longitudinal outcome studies. She also serves as adjunct faculty in the Department of Pediatrics at Emory School of Medicine. Dr. Krupa's primary focus is on long-term health effects following TBI and outcomes for children and adolescents with brain injuries. She is a principal investigator for a longitudinal study funded by the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research, NIDRR, a comprehensive model transition program for teens with acquired brain injuries, and a study to examine transition to adulthood across complex medical conditions. I know that's a lot of words and a lot of acronyms, but we are so thrilled to have you with us today, Julie. I first came across Julie, although I have been enamored of the CDC throughout my whole career, as I have worked with various individuals and folks there and been to the CDC many times. My favorite is seeing that huge wall of where the diseases are around the world in the command center. But I got to hear that presentation that you did on concussion. And as I watched it, I was sitting in my office that day just listening to her presentation. I think I reached out to you immediately afterwards and said, hi there, we're doing this little thing in a couple of months in Northern Virginia, and we need you. And she immediately said, I'll be there. So thank you for joining us from the CDC in Atlanta and coming to us today. And I invite you to come up and share your presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Yeah. And by the way, I am so honored to be here because I want to hear from all of you. So please feel free to interrupt me, but I'm going to try to go through these. You have the slides. And I'm honored to be at CDC. I joined there in 2012. I've been in the field a long time, but I was an academic researcher who had to write grants for everything to sustain myself. And I used to go there and give talks, and I was shocked that they wanted me to apply. And I'm still the only one on the team who's ever worked with patients. Everybody's a data person. So I take what I do in research from the voices of people I've worked with or heard from. So please let me know. I'm interested in hearing what you think about gaps. Okay. Oops, I have to log in. And I'm sorry these can't be presented, but you have them, right? Yep. Okay. And I'm going to go through them fairly quickly because I want to give everyone a chance to speak, and you're going to let me know, right? So, what do we know about children in concussion? I'm going to talk about the prevalence, the diagnosis, effects of concussion in children, and taking care of children and what to do, what we know. Because when I started in the field in the 80s, I was part of the first book called Head Injury Rehab, Children and Adolescents. There was zero research on children. There wasn't that much with adults either. Fred Rivara had started some things, but there was nothing. And that's why we wrote that book. We wanted to get the word out that kids need care, because they do. So if you look on our website, we talk about what is a brain injury. And CDC is a line item in the congressional budget, and we are specifically only able to address traumatic brain injury right now, although we're thinking about how to address other kinds of brain injuries, but like loss of oxygen to the brain. So most TBIs that occur every year are concussions, and it is caused by multiple things. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those areas. Medical providers may describe a concussion as a mild brain injury because concussions are usually not life-threatening, but even so, the effects of the concussion can be serious. So we know in the U.S., and at CDC, we used to talk about emergency department visits, which we need to, but right now our data is on hospitalizations and deaths for all TBI based on healthcare visits to the ED, and you see those statistics in your slides. So we know that I always talk about the 2014 data because that's the last data we have on who went to the ED. And 2.5 million TBI-related ED visits were then. Most were around children, and the most common injury was unintentional falls. And at that time, we didn't really track sports-related injuries. But we know that older adults have the most TBIs, right? Over 65. But the next group is children ages 0 to 4. And I've always been interested in this because we used to think, oh, their brains are fine, right? But then now we're learning that they may experience symptoms for a long time. And we also have learned, this is a study I did with Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, not all kids go to the emergency department for concussions. In their system, most of them went to the pediatrician. And so at CDC, we're working more on trying to get messages out to pediatricians. We also know that common mechanisms are falls, motor vehicle crashes, violence, and sports-related recreational activities. But that one slide that shows the graph, we did a study looking at, by age, what were the mechanisms of injury, because sports has become very prevalent in discussion, as it should be, but we know that children ages 0 to 5, they really don't engage in sports till about 6 or 7. So you'll see that diagram. The orange bars are sports concussion, and you see that it's mostly in adolescence, right? When kids are enrolled in sports, or more likely to be enrolled in sports. So it's a common area, and we thank the NFL bringing it to our attention. Prior to going to CDC, they came to Georgia and helped us get that act, the Return to Play Act. And sports are a common cause of TBI. Which sport has the highest rate of concussions? Of course, tackle football. And then other sports settings like soccer, you'll see that one pager that we have in the slide lets you know what's the highest rate. And we also have learned there's a difference in concussion between girls and boys, right? Women and men. Women are more likely to report symptoms. There's a lot we're learning about that. So back in 2018, we published guidelines that were done over 4 years with multiple experts on what should we do to diagnose concussion. And at the time, that was published when we first started learning about the visual effects. So unfortunately, that guideline does not have anything in there about vision effects. But that was the first step where we tried to get, people did literature reviews. It took a long time and was finally cleared. But now there's even more to learn about diagnosis. Really, one of the things we wanted to do was make sure there was a consistent guideline across all healthcare settings for kids, so everybody was doing the same thing. And motor and balance problems at the time we learned may be more subtle, but they may not be. At that time, there's also concussion symptom checklists. You'll see multiple of these for sports. I gave an example of one in the report. So one of the things I'm really pushing right now is symptoms of concussion can be very different for young children, in part because their parents report it. The kids really don't say, they may say I have a headache, but their parents will tell you things like they're much more emotional, they're crying all the time, they're not eating as much. If they were toilet trained, they may be incontinent. So Miriam Beauchamp in Toronto is developing a checklist just for young kids. And we have a publication coming out about that soon. So what do we know about the effects of TBI in children? We do know it affects how the brain works and it impacts development. TBI is those who survive, they could have effects for years. So you might not see it at the time of injury, for young children especially, but when they're in school later, they may start getting into trouble or do something that is different. And when I did the study at Children's, I was shocked. We had 65% of our study sample was mild. I was shocked, and parents were coming to us at the time saying, we see differences in our child, but nobody will listen to us because they're testing okay developmentally. But they were very concerned about their kids. And as you know, and we wrote this article in 2017, children are in two models of care, the healthcare setting and schools. And I really pushed at CDC to start looking into schools because that's where kids are for the rest of their life. What has changed for kids over the years? Well, imaging has advanced. Imaging and biomarkers and all this brain physiology, which I was always interested in because I was a biology major at first and I always wanted to learn more about the brain. We also know that having multiple traumatic brain injuries and concussions means something. So if you have your first one at age 2, you have your whole lifespan ahead of you, and having raised 3 boys, I know there's multiple reasons how they could get concussions over time. Age at the time of injury means something. As I said, we used to think kids younger than 5 are fine, but now we're learning we need to take care of them. And their past and current health history means something. So one of the papers I've written, we study healthcare settings, but I like to read this data on parent report. And from that, even though we can't verify that it happened medically, we learned that kids who had ADHD, learning disorders, speech and language problems prior to their injury were more likely to have issues after because of that. And as was mentioned by Donna, there's huge heterogeneity in outcomes based on the injury, individual child characteristics, and the child's environment. And as we know, those from lower socioeconomic status may not be able to get the care as others can. And outcomes after TBI vary, and I created this picture because we want kids to graduate from high school, go to college, get a job, but what we're learning is there is a very high rate of childhood TBI in the justice system, a history of childhood TBI. And we need to do something. We don't want our kids going there. So that's one of the things we're working on. And so over the years, there's multiple outcomes for children being published. I'm so thrilled. I was recently at an international pediatric conference, and the amount of research looking at what happens to kids is amazing. In the medical community, schools, looking at their behavior and their emotional status. And outcomes for children may depend on parental factors, and I did a paper with in Children's Hospital Philadelphia where we looked at parent education and household income, and they were associated with how children were recovering, especially after moderate to severe TBI. We also learned that experiencing a mild childhood TBI can affect their emotional well-being. And I did a paper with Richard Delmonico. We looked at Kaiser Permanente data in Northern California, which is huge. And we looked at kids at their initial age of injury and if they were ever diagnosed with a behavioral disorder. And we looked at only mild and concussion. And interestingly enough, 4 years later, there was a very high rate, especially in children ages 10 to 13. So we're learning that this can happen years later. And as we know, kids have several transitions in their life. They go from preschool to kindergarten, kindergarten to middle school, and during those times, you know, the records don't always go forward, right? They might have had an injury at 5, went to kindergarten, parents didn't share the records because it's up to them, and then they started having behavioral trouble. So people don't really know that it was associated with that. And then that transition to adulthood. And in that slide, you'll see Wile E. Coyote because he jumps off a cliff. We don't know what's happening to these kids when they transition. But we do have some parents telling us a little bit about it. Thank you, Kelly. So we are understanding it. And from that program that I started at Children's where we did 2 weeks of intervention, I still keep in touch with those families. And I'm learning what kids are doing. Are they doing what they want to do? Not necessarily, but some of them are very successful. And we were asked multiple times, CTE risk for children. Well, we don't know. There's not enough research, and that's what I have to tell families. We know about CTE from older adults, but we don't know in kids about CTE. So I did 2 papers with a survey called the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which asked adolescents, have you ever had a sports-related concussion? And then we can look at different factors like, did you miss school? Did you get into trouble? So the first paper, we looked at academic issues, and yes, there was a statistically significant difference between adolescents who said yes to that question to those who said no. They were having cognitive problems, their grades dropped. The second study, we looked to see if they were getting in trouble at school. And yes, they were. The kids who said yes were more likely to bring a gun to school, be expelled. And that's something that sometimes is the first symptom that they're having trouble. And we don't want that to happen at all. Now, we did a report to this is part of the reason why I was hired, because we did a report to Congress on the management of traumatic brain injury in children. It's on our website, and it was a great honor to do that because we convened an outside board to give us advice, to read it and let us know if it really meant anything. So that was released, and we really talked about gaps in care in community and school services, and strategies to prevent short and long-term consequences. But because of that, the Galveston Conference, I don't know whether any of you have ever heard of that. It's a brain injury conference that was organized by the Moody Foundation, and we used to go down. Well, they designated 2-year meetings on pediatrics, and that's where a lot of pediatric people, we got a lot out of that. Brenda Egan Johnson was there from Pennsylvania, and Chris Giza, who's a neurologist, Brad Kowalski, who's a PM&R doc, we all talked about, and I'll mention this at the end, chronic disease in children. We better start talking about that. So, TBI is a chronic condition. In your slides, I give you the World Health definition. I also tell you that John Corrigan and Flora Hammond have a grant to develop a model, and John has really been advocating for it. I was on a call yesterday where he talked about we need to do this and why, but we also are learning that children, it can be a chronic condition. So Brad and Chris and I wrote a commentary in JHTR to say, how do we know when it's a chronic condition? And right now, most of the research talks about unmet needs of children, but there's more come out since that time, so we're hoping to further that to make sure children get care throughout their lifespan. We really want them to have good medical management and a link between the medical community and schools. That communication is really important. Okay, I'm almost done. We really want them to have family and school support so that they're well taken care of. And you'll look at that slide, return to play and activity for children. So sports is big, but we're also learning from educators that children who experience other mechanism of injury or they're younger are not getting the same care as high school athletes enrolled in sports. And I see heads nodding. And we need to work on that because return to driving, there's a lot to do, and there's variability across every state on how this is happening. But we know that IDEA was established in the early 90s. There's a TBI category in there. And technically, if you report it to school, you should be examined under that act. But that's not the case in every state. Some states are aligning with return to play, and they may look at return to learn. There's a lot of work to do in that area. But we do know children with moderate to severe TBI, the outcomes, they have worse grades, higher rates of grade retention, and more often need special education. However, to qualify for special ed, when we first wrote that in the early 90s, all we said is you needed a letter from the doctor or some medical. Now, many states have said, oh, you need to show how you've changed in your learning. Well, if you were a bright student, you're not going to show that when you first go back, or even an average student. It's years later that you might show that you're not keeping up, and that's not being followed. We really need to know there are very low rates of enrollment in special education. In fact, IDEA considers it a low incidence category, and we know from all the medical data it's not low incidence. We have to work on that. And we also know that the effects of TBI are contributing to high rates of criminal behavior and incarceration. So we're really working with schools to focus on learning. We're currently funding 2 return to school projects where we've asked them to look at one state that has an like Brain Steps in Pennsylvania, to a state that does not have a program. And unfortunately, it started right before COVID, so they weren't able to, it's not over yet. They haven't been able to publish, but they will in the next year. But what was interesting, one of our sites in Oregon was only recruiting from the schools in Ohio, a state that does not have a program. And after 2 years, they couldn't find any kids. They had to come back to Ohio and talk to the medical facilities in order to get people enrolled in their study. That I found very interesting. So, children may be forgotten over time. I added some points of gaps in educational services, but that's one of the main ones. They're not taken care of over time. But there's some promising practices because some states are collaborating with healthcare settings. They're developing programs. We just need to reduce the variability so that we make sure all kids get taken care of. So coordination is the key between healthcare settings and schools, educating educators, and you'll see in our Heads Up resources, and thanks to Kelly Sarmiento, who started this 20 years ago, but we have free videos on there for educators, coaches, healthcare providers. We also have one-pagers. You are welcome to download those. Recovery tips, training for concussion among children. You'll see all our online trainings in there. So my final point is, traumatic brain injury is not just an event that you stop taking care of after it's diagnosed. From infancy to childhood, from infancy to adulthood, it's really important to take care of children. And that's really my point. We want you to recognize TBI, monitor it, and take care of children. And thank you very much. And I look forward to talking and hearing what a lot of people have observed in this area, because it's very important, the voices in the field. And that's why I was so honored to come today. Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. And we'll have time for questions of Julie as we open up this dialogue to hear from all of our presenters here. I'm going to do a very brief introduction of each of our presenters. You have their full bios in your packets. And then we'll do a lot of back and forth questioning and answers. So get ready, folks. Okay, all the way at the far end, we have with us Bryna Helfer. Bryna currently serves as the Director of the Employment Supports and Innovative Partnerships with the Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP, at the U.S. Department of Labor. In this role, she leads efforts to ensure that necessary support is available for employees with disabilities, including accessible transportation, inclusive technology, emergency preparedness, accessible housing, and much more. Under her leadership, her team also supports the Partnership on Inclusive Apprenticeships, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology, and the State Exchange on Employment and Disability, working with states, cities, and counties to implement inclusive disability employment policies. That's quite a lot to be managing in any given day, Bryna. Thank you for that. I know there's much more about Bryna in the packet, and she'll be, of course, talking about her work and her history in Northern Virginia and knowledge of BIS and all of the work that we do here on brain injury. We have with us today Dr. Gregory Oshanek. Yep, that's you. More commonly known as Dr. O, I'm told. Dr. O has been the medical director of the Center for Neurorehabilitation Services in Richmond, Virginia since 1991. After attending Ohio State University, he entered the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston and received his MD in 1977. His postgraduate studies were at Duke University Medical Center. His academic career includes faculty appointments at Duke, the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, Medical College of Virginia, and most recently, the Department of Neurological Surgery and the Virginia Neurological Institute at the University of Virginia. We know you have many publications. You work with many patients, including some who are even in this room. And you have become, as far as I know, legendary. Thank you for being with us today. We have John Reynolds with us. John has been a certified athletic trainer for over 25 years. In 1997, John began working as an athletic trainer at George C. Marshall High School in Falls Church, Virginia, a position he held for 16 years. Since 2013, John has served as the Athletic Training Program Administrator for Fairfax County Public Schools. He has served as President and Secondary School Committee Chair for the Virginia Athletic Trainers Association, VATA, and as a member of the National Athletic Trainers Association, NATA, Secondary School Committee. Since 2010, John has worked with the Virginia Department of Health, the Virginia Department of Education, and the Virginia Concussion Initiative to promote awareness about concussions and youth and scholastic sports safety. He currently serves as a member of the Virginia High School League's Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, is chair of the VHSL Coaches Education Committee, and is in his second term as a member of the Virginia Brain Injury Council. Thank you so much for being with us today, John, and bringing forward a lot of information that I think we are going to find very useful. Dr. Robin Bell is with us today, a 20-year Army veteran. Thank you for your service. Transitioned to work in intelligence community before founding Bell Consulting Group in 2014. BCG, a woman-owned and service-disabled veteran-owned small business, provides human relations consulting to government entities. In 2018, she founded Rehabilitation Reform and Reentry Resources, R4, a nonprofit dedicated to prison reform and helping returning citizens reintegrate into society. In a short period of time, R4 has made tremendous strides in its efforts to help those who want a second chance at life after incarceration. R4 boasts a 96% success rate on identifying returning citizens that they can offer substantial support in re-entering society. I saw your face, Robin, as Julie was talking and mentioned something about how we lose a lot of data on children as they become older, teenagers and moving into adulthood, and what we know that means for the criminal justice system. I mentioned to Robin when she came in this morning that last week I was on the West Coast with Kelly at the NASHIA conference, the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators, and there was an entire track at that conference on brain injury and the criminal justice system. It was eye-opening. So as you can start to see here, lots of connections amongst our presenters here today. Last but absolutely not least, we have Shana Richardson. Shana is the Product Marketing Manager at Impact Applications. She is a Towson University alumna with a BS in Mass Communications with a concentration in Public Relations and Advertising and a minor in Marketing. Following graduation, she worked as a product marketing analyst in the education technology industry, specifically focusing on health and human services. She transitioned into healthcare technology and began working for Impact Applications, the maker of Impact, Impact Pediatric, and Impact Quick Test, all FDA-cleared medical devices that assist in the assessment and management of concussions. Shana is passionate about health and wellness and brain health specifically, especially how it relates to the aging population. So welcome to this esteemed panel. Thank you all again for being here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to call upon each of you in turn to share some opening remarks, talk a little bit about what you do, what your interest around concussion is, what you would like this audience to know. And then after we've gone through our panel, we'll get into some back and forth dialogue. So I'm going to begin with you, Bryna, at the end of the table.
So I'm just really thrilled to be here. I recently returned to federal government at the Office of Disability Employment Policy, which is a small, non-regulatory agency to advance employment opportunities for people with disabilities. And that's for people with all types of disabilities and range of abilities. And we're really, at ODEP and the Department of Labor, interested in good jobs for good wage across the country. And recently, we've really been also looking at stay-at-work, return-to-work issues in terms of individuals either hurt on the job or non-work related injuries in terms of how they stay at work. And because we know that employers, that's an investment they're making in their employees. So to have to retrain and hire new people it's really important that we can also not only help people come into the workforce, but stay in the workforce. So I'm going to get into a little bit about accommodations, but before I do, I just, you mentioned, my background in brain injury. I have a long history in brain injury, so I'm really excited to be here. I started my journey in acute rehab, came to Northern Virginia to do post-acute rehab, and where I've come in contact with many people here, and was fortunate to be the director of the Traumatic Brain Injury Technical Assistance Center for the grant program, state grant program across the country. So it's an honor to kind of be back in the sandbox and in this space with all of you. So as we think about work accommodations, what I really want folks to remember that under the ADA, reasonable accommodations is a right. And under the ADA amendments of 2008, actually added that a temporary condition can be an actual disability if the condition is sufficiently severe. And the effects of those, I'm going to read this just because I think it's important, the effects of an impairment lasting or expected to last fewer than 6 months can be substantially limiting within the meaning of the amendments of the ADA in 2008. And employees with temporary impairments can be eligible to receive accommodations in some cases. The key is whether the impairment is sufficiently severe. And we all know that in concussion, Julie, you just laid out, and the story that was told earlier really highlights that. So, self-disclosure, and you indicated in your survey that Brain Injury Services did that self-disclosure is difficult and challenging. And we are working at ODEP to address self-disclosure, really starting to work with employers on how to create an environment of inclusive employment, and working with individuals with disabilities to be comfortable disclosing their employment. And so that takes all of us. And so this coordination between the medical system and individuals with brain injury, concussion, or long-term brain injury as more severe TBI, regardless of the range of ability or impact, and employers. So that how many of you are in the health medical, and how many of you help coordinate return to work with employer groups? Thank you. That is so critical to what we really, it takes all of us. So really working on that. ODEP funds the Office of Disability Employment, here I go. ODEP funds the Job Accommodations Network. And how many of you know Jan? Ask Jan, right? Great resources for those who don't. And I have brought some cards that has Jan. We also fund an employer accessibility resource network called EARN. Both have great resources and on specific disabilities. And I actually looked up brain injury in Jan yesterday, and there's a whole fact sheet on executive functioning. Right? Great tip sheet for employers and for individuals with disabilities. So Jan found that most reasonable accommodations, median one-time cost is $300 or less. And some accommodations really cost no money. Flexible work schedules, teleworking, modifying break schedules, or assistance from a job coach. Exploring options for transitional work or lighter duty until people can resume full work slates. And maybe even reassigning some work duties to account for skill changes or changes in function. So I encourage you to utilize our ODEP resources. And I just want to touch on a couple of really quick things, because I know we're tight on time, but you mentioned driving. And you all heard that accessible transportation is in my portfolio at the Department of Labor. And that is because we know that transportation can be a significant barrier for getting to work, to staying at work. And so accessible transportation means a lot of things. It may mean that you can drive, but you need a temporary or long-term accessible parking placard. It may mean that you have to shift to thinking about another type of transportation. Can you use public transportation? Can you get on the bus or the rail system? We live in an area where we have a wealth of transportation resources. If not, are you eligible, temporary or long-term, for ADA paratransit? If you can't get to the bus, you can't independently ride the bus, you might be eligible. And so really helping, and if you have the resources, you might be able to use ride-sharing apps like Lyft and Uber or other ride-sharing resources. But to start to have that conversation in the return-to-work conversation, but so often it's an afterthought. And the same with housing. So I just wanted to put those on the table. October launches National Disability Employment Awareness Month. I hope that you will all be in with us to raise awareness. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Well, I don't know if I can follow that, but anyway, as Donna said, I really don't need this, but okay. I am Dr. Robin Bell, and one of my most honorable things is to have retired from the military and then starting the nonprofit R4. So we assist men and women coming home from incarceration. And I started this journey after my dissertation, which was on shared experiences of nonviolent African American males with drug addictions who recidivate. DC Department of Correction awarded a grant to, I have a consultant firm as well, Belton Consulting Group, and with that grant, it was a $1.4 million. And we took that $1.4 million, and any employer who would hire a returning citizen, we paid their salary for a year. We had 2 cohorts, yes. And along with paying their salary, our first cohort were juvenile lifers. They were all from DC. They were men who had been sentenced to 60 years to life as juveniles. The Second Look Act was passed in 2018, so all of the men, and they were all men from DC, who had been performing great in prison, taking classes, not causing any problems, they were brought back before the judges in DC. 87% of them were released, time served. So our first cohort were 3 juvenile lifers. One of our juvenile lifers had been in, I know so much prison lingo, so the hole, which means solitary confinement, for 3 years. For 3 years, he was in solitary confinement. So when we start working with these men, we had to teach them, technology, I'm really technologically challenged, but they really were. Computers, everything had changed. So Bell Consulting Group's team, we taught them how to ride the metro. We provided metro cards. We took them to restaurants to show them how to, be at nice places. We bought them clothes. We taught them how to dress for success. We taught them how to interview, for jobs. So we just walked them through life. And as Donna said, we have a very high success rate. Only 2 of our returning citizens went back to prison. One was no fault of his own. But another thing that's very interesting, the juvenile lifers, even though they came back and they were released because they had performed well in prison, they are still, as they say, on paper for one of them for 27 years. So the time that they didn't spend, someone who was sentenced to 60 years, if they got out in 27 years, and then the rest of those 33 years, they're on probation. So they have to walk a very fine line. But there is not a day, a week that goes past that I do not get a phone call, that I do not get a text, an email saying, Dr. Bell, without the support of you and your team, I would have never made it. And then I'm going to tell this one story. But you can go to my website. There are so many success stories. We have we partner with prisons, federal and state, local prisons. So we partnered with this prison in Ohio. And I would work with men and women that were coming home because rehabilitation begins on the inside, not only on the inside of those prison walls, but on the inside of their brains. So, and they have to want to change. So I got a call from the resource counselor one day saying, Dr. Bell, I have this guy. You probably don't want to work with him, but he's been incarcerated the majority of his life. He has not received a phone call, a letter, or a visit in 11 years when his parents died. And I said, Mr. Sweeney, why wouldn't I want to work with him? He said, because he's a former supremacist, white supremacist. His first cellmate was James Earl Ray. He was taught to hate by James Earl Ray. So he got out, he came home, we assisted him with everything from the minute he left prison. When he left prison, he did not have shoes. All he had was the prison clothes and things like that. We sent everything he needed to the prison. We made sure he got to the halfway house. Now Franklin has 2 cars. He has a home. He's reconnected with his family. So as Juliet was saying, it starts when these kids are young. Our juvenile lifers were all raised in D.C. during the crack epidemic. A lot of them, one of them, Marcus, and Marcus was coming today, but he wasn't able to. But Marcus, his mother was on drugs, and his sister sexually and physically abused him. She beat him so bad one night that across his back, she beat him with a strap. She took hot sauce and poured it on his wounds and sit him in the tub. And the neighbors just heard all this screaming, so they called the cops. And so I just say that to say that it starts when they are young. All of my juvenile lifers went through some type of traumatic brain injury as children and just didn't have the guidance. When Marcus went to prison, he had a third grade education. And Marcus said, because with the feds, they sentence you to months, not years. And they gave Marcus like 600, 700 months. Marcus said he was in prison for 10 years before he realized he had life. So now Marcus is out. He's amazing. He's wonderful. He has a job. He has a car. So I could go on and on, but I won't. So that's that.
Well, I cannot follow that up, but hi everyone, I am Shayna Richardson. I'm the product marketing manager at Impact Applications. We do testing for concussions, and it's not a diagnostic tool, however, it can aid in the diagnosis and assessment of concussions. I came into the brain injury space. I have been volunteering with the Alzheimer's Association specifically since I was about 10 years old. Both of my great-grandmothers passed away, unfortunately, from Alzheimer's, so that has been a very passionate thing in my family. Back in 2022, I believe, I was working at an educational technology company, and I was specifically bringing degrees online in the health and human services space, so things like Doctor of Physical Therapy, speech pathology, Doctor of Pharmacy, things like that. And I wanted to make a change because that same year, my grandmother, who raised me, was diagnosed with dementia. So I was really looking for a way to use the skills that I had gotten in marketing to bring awareness to things that really do matter in this world. So I found Impact, and I was so impressed with just the availability of the normative data sets that we have in order to help people who may not have a baseline test to tell them that, okay, this is the snapshot of where you are at this very moment, but you can compare that post-injury to a whole slew of normative data to tell you where you should be performing, and that can assist in the repair and your recovery plan into return to life and return to play. So that is how I got into this world. I'm very excited to be a part of this panel with everyone here. I'm definitely the least qualified of everyone, but I am very, very excited to understand and better help figuring out how we can put Impact into the hands of people, getting baseline testing, post-injury testing, making sure that people are aided and abetted in getting back to life and returning to learn.
I thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. I'll share a little story, I guess, of kind of my journey to getting here and being part of this panel and this group. I graduated from graduate school in 1997, got my first job back in Fairfax County. I'm a product of FCPS. I'm from this area. Came home and got my first job as an athletic trainer, which is really all I ever wanted to be in the course of my professional preparation. Early on in my time, I was invited by a colleague to, dragged along with a colleague to go to one of what I think was probably one of the first dedicated concussion symposiums that I can ever recall. It was in Washington, D.C. This was probably 1998 or 1999. I don't remember much about it. I don't remember who spoke, but the one thing I do remember was one of the presenters made the point of saying that at that time there were 19 different sets of peer-reviewed, published guidelines about concussion and concussion management. And the thing that struck me was none of them were the same. They were all so different. There were similarities, but every one of them approached the notion of can you return to play with symptoms differently, and all had different answers. As a young professional, that again struck me then and has stuck with me since. And as I entered my own practice as an athletic trainer, I remember at times being sort of confused, overwhelmed, uncertain about how to proceed in terms of managing an issue which I knew was real and was happening, but very much feeling like we were flying blind or in the dark about how to proceed. Things got better. Fast forward about a decade to 2015, I guess. I'm at another conference in Washington, D.C., and an epidemiologist was speaking, and again, don't remember who or the affiliation or anything, but the thing that struck with me from that presentation was she said that at that time, again, 2015-ish, concussion was the fastest growing public health initiative in the history of the United States. In less than 5 years, or about 5 years, they went from no legislation anywhere to legislation in all 50 states plus the District of Columbia. She compared that to things like bicycle helmets and car seats and seat belts and other things that took far longer to reach a similar level of attention. Obviously a good thing for us from lots of perspectives, but still lots of room to grow. The good news is even today, if you fast forward another decade, there's far more consensus about a lot of things. There's far more guidance and direction in terms of how to manage the issue, what's actually happening in the brain, support structures, interventions, all of those kinds of things have gotten far more attention, and we've made a lot of headway, which is certainly great. We've seen cultural awareness improve, not perfect, not great, but better than it was. And lots of avenues to continue to explore within our research avenues as we go forward. My personal interest today really gets to trying to help continue to bridge the gap that exists between the medical community and the school environment. I will say in pretty much any presentation I give that doctors don't speak teacher and teachers don't speak doctor. And so part of the reason we run into issues, I think, is schools tend to view concussion purely as a medical event and a medical issue, which it absolutely is. But it's also an educational issue. And who are the best, most experienced, most well-trained and prepared people to attack an educational issue? It's educators, it's teachers, it's school counselors, and so on. And so I'm very much driven by trying to help medical providers better communicate in a language, in a way that school staff can better take and internalize and interpret and apply. And I'm very interested in trying to help encourage school staff to use their expertise. They see these kids every single day. The physician, the provider sees them once every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever. So how can we help both of those groups communicate more effectively and utilize their relative expertise to better support the student? The last thing I will say is I've been very fortunate to work with the Virginia Department of Education in the development of their concussion guidelines. Those were first published in 2011 following the passage of Virginia's concussion law in 2010. Lots of evolution in terms of those guidance. The Code of Virginia has changed a couple of times, but a tremendously worthwhile endeavor and an opportunity to engage with lots of stakeholders across the state. And I continue to work with both the Virginia, with the Department of Education through their TBI teams, which are groups that DOE supports to receive specific training on the entire continuum of TBI, but increasingly including a little bit of portion about concussion specifically, but also through the Virginia Concussion Initiative, which is something I hope we'll hear a little bit more about as the day goes on. Because that's an endeavor, a partnership between George Mason University, the Virginia Department of Health, the CDC actually has been part of that as well, to really try to target resources and interventions to schools to help school staff develop their capacity to support students, again, specifically with concussion, but this is easily applied across the TBI continuum. So very happy to be here, and thank you all for the opportunity.
Good morning. So I've been, I guess the current term is in the brain injury space. Is that the term? I've been in the brain injury space since 1981. So I've been an old timer at this. And concussion really is an issue of a developmental disorder. no matter how you look at it, it impacts the individual's development. It derails your development, whether you're a child or whether you're an adult. As you're trying to emancipate, it derails that entire process. One of the things that we look for in terms of staff at CNS, at my facility at Richmond, are people that not necessarily have a pediatric background, but they have an appreciation of development. Either they've had children, or they've worked with children, or they've been camp counselors, but they see the evolution of and the building blocks that are necessary in terms of skill development, skill acquisition, and the multiplicity of things that we watch our grandchildren and children and infants kind of evolve into. And that really is the process of normal human growth, but it's also the process that we see when one is recovering from any kind of neurologic trauma. All of the abnormal reflexes that we look for, whether it's the fencing response or anything of that nature, you see Tua out there on the field. All of those things, asymmetric tonic neck, all of those things are normal reflexes in infants. We overcome those from a top-down inhibition as our brain matures. But with injury, those things are released. And that's how we know that there's been injury. Unfortunately, the more injured we become, or the lower the threshold for injury, the faster those reflexes can be manifest. It's not popular, I guess I should say, to use the term development, to use the term relearning, to use the term re-education, and my apologies to those in the audience that work in the health insurance industry, because if you use education in terms of your language of what you're doing in your clinic, it doesn't get paid for. Health insurance doesn't pay for education. So we've got to use fancy schmancy words and kind of obscure it. But in essence, what we're really doing is we're re-educating the central nervous system and the evolution of that. So yes, we are doing things. We just can't be forthright about it. And that's kind of, I think, created some barriers to really understanding and normalizing to some degree and demystifying to some degree what happens with concussion. Everybody in this room's had a concussion. I've had 7 of them. I mean, and the issue is that by and large, our brains are plastic enough, and we can redirect ourselves, or we can pivot as we get older and find other ways, and we get the guidance, we get the therapy, we get the re-education that we need to adapt and to continue to evolve. So if it gets demystified to the point that it's not an embarrassment, it's not a stigma, there's not something that's associated with it that is, oh my God, you've got that, it becomes easier to help educate and move the cause forward. I'm very candid with my patients when I tell them, yeah, I've had 7 concussions. And they kind of look at me like, you're not worried? Yeah, I'm worried. I'm worried every day. I don't want an 8th. I have to worry about sleep. I've got to worry about hydration. I've got to worry about nutrition. I've got to worry about exercise. I have 1 too many scotches. It's not a good idea. I've got to be constantly aware of those kinds of things. There is a cognitive reserve factor that happens as we get older. So we find ourselves, since I've mentioned insurance, and I don't mean to be picking on you, please, but we find ourselves in a situation where, at a time where we've got more and more knowledge about personalized medicine, and being able to look at the genetics and do a deep dive in terms of what medication is going to work for this patient, and what is your cytochrome P450 characteristics, and how you don't have to do trial and error and trial and error and trial and error. We find, in contrast to that we have to have protocols that are pretty much cookie cutter. And the problem is, you and I are different, not just by virtue of our XX and XY. I mean, everybody in this room is different. And just like psychotherapy has to be customized, the kind of rehabilitation that you do for individuals with concussions, the way that you identify the type of difficulty that an individual has with a concussion is going to be unique. Brent Maisel, who is the current medical director for a Brain Injury Association and was my junior resident when I was a medical student acting intern at Galveston, Brent says if you've seen one brain injury, you've seen one brain injury, because everybody's different. So you do a test that looks at vision. Okay, great. You may find the saccadic dysfunction. You may find a change in binocularity. But if you then don't look at an auditory processing issue, the individual, great, you fix their vision, but their auditory processing is shot. They're not going to be able to integrate those two things. And if simultaneously you've not looked more carefully at vestibular issues, then every time they go into a grocery store and they're visually dependent, they charge out because they get, oh, they've got agoraphobia. No, they don't have agoraphobia. They're visually dependent. And somebody cuts in front of them, they get scared, they feel like they're going to fall, and they book it out. So it has to be looked at each and every separate section. And everybody's going to present differently. Anxiety in us as humans arises from a sensory mismatch. We're designed to be in parallel. If our eyes don't work in parallel, if our ears don't work in parallel, if our gyroscopes, our vestibular system doesn't work in parallel, we feel anxious. We feel dis-ease, not disease, but dis-ease. We pay a lot of money going to King's Dominion or going to Six Flags because temporarily we get all of those systems kind of whirly-gigged. And that's fun, briefly. But if we're living that way like Kent, 24/7, 52, it ceases to be fun. And then the common person, physician, health provider, whatever, says, oh, you're anxious. And you get a referral to psychiatry. And, okay, so you get some Xanax, you get some Valium. Well, that puts a blanket over everything. And yes, a little bit of benzodiazepine does increase GABA, and GABA does suppress vestibular issues. And so, yeah, it does help temporarily in terms of some of the balance issue and even some of the visual issues. But then you have to keep escalating the dose to get where you need to be. So people do the wrong thing, do semi-right thing for the wrong reason, and then patients never get all the way where they need to be. It also creates an issue that because we're all looking for programmed, and I apologize if I'm taking more time. Give me a shepherd's hook if you need to. It also creates an issue where because we're looking at a model where everybody fits one pattern, that a 5-minute evaluation, a 10-minute evaluation, it's much easier to write a prescription and get them out the door. And then if they don't respond to that prescription, it's the patient's fault. They're malingering, they're depressed, they're anxious. And because many of our folks get injured in ways that have to do with a work-related setting, workers' comp claim, or a personal injury claim, or something of that nature, people are looking askance at like, are you trying to get out of something? Are you really faking to get more money? And there is this adversarial role that comes into play that then further demeans the experience of the person. Or the student, are you trying to get out of class? Are you trying to get out of an exam? What's going on here? So in general, the entirety of the process becomes one in which there needs to be much more awareness of developmental stage of the individual, the personal attributes of the individual, and the way to optimize over the course of their lives how to manage all of those developmental issues that arise. I will say, speaking of pediatrics, 2 years ago, presented some really exciting, at least to my way of thinking, work at the International Pediatric Brain Injury meeting in New York, where we did neuroimaging of and did volumetric measurements of a child who had a very severe traumatic brain injury, and here in Northern Virginia, and basically had very massive areas of atrophy in his brain, and did volumetric measurements. He, unfortunately, because of behavioral issues, had to be in a residential program for 3 years. Intensive PT, OT, speech, behavioral therapies, etc. We re-imaged him at the end of those 3 years. Regions of his brain that were at the first percentile in terms of volume for his age mates had increased in volume based upon the intensity of services that he had, demonstrating that what we do makes a difference, demonstrating that paying for rehab, paying for therapy, again, that investment makes a difference. And this young man is now back here. He's going to regular school. He's got a service animal, and he is, his trajectory is much better. So, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for indulging me, and thank you for being interested in this. I'm at the end of this. You guys are at the start of this, and anything I can do personally, professionally, to facilitate what you're doing, that's my mission. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Wow, what a great panel. Each of you has shared some incredible information. I know I have a bunch of questions, but I want to ask our audience here who has a question that they are ready to ask of any of our panelists. We're going to start with Pam.
First, I'm going to have to stand up so I can see you guys. Thank you so much. I want to tap every one of you. I do work for an insurance company. I got the direction. Yes, absolutely. And the beautiful thing about this opportunity is that we're here in the room to hear it with you. And I also wanted to share, I work with the state Medicaid program. And the state Medicaid program does have an element of looking at all authorizations through the eyes of EPDST, which is the early periodic diagnostic testing to assess the difference in development and if these services will actually impact and improve the state and the of the member, right. So I just wanted to share that element does exist. Also that we are here also trying to help socialize the new benefit for targeted case management for individuals who've had traumatic brain injuries. So every piece of work that's happening is happening in concert, and we want to be a part of the voice that socializes the opportunity to start early, to intervene early, and to support those services who are doing the work within the community. So we appreciate the ability to be here. I'm here with one of my case managers. She has joined me today so that we can hear and learn and also help support communicating the benefit of all the services that you guys have shared. So thank you, and thank you.
I had a couple of questions, so I'll just go ahead and ask them, and if they're better suited for the small group, then that's fine. My name is Christine Crawford. I'm an occupational therapist at Virginia Hospital Center, now VHC Health. So I'm lucky to be accompanied by some of our PTs as well. We are I guess, enhancing our concussion protocols and what we provide at the hospital, and have come across some interesting persistent cases recently. So that's part of what really made me say I need to be there today. One, I was wondering what your thoughts were on neuro-optometrists. Unfortunately, insurance does not cover many of the neuro-optometry treatments and evaluations that we would like individuals to receive, and I found them to be such a helpful partner, especially as an OT, to understand what exactly is happening. Is it vision? Is it perception? Is it cognition? That helps me know what direction I should go for my patients. So I was curious if you all have neuro-optometrists on your team, what your thoughts are, and how we could help insurance cover that benefit.
Neuro-optometry was not something that existed for the first 15, 20 years of my career. And so we would, alternate patch eyes because you can't see double if there's only one eye. Then mid-90s, all of a sudden, we start having these critters that come out with neuro-optometry. And working in tandem with our occupational therapists, it changed lives dramatically. I would say 95% of our patients see neuro-optometrists, at least for a consult. Many times they go for additional therapy. And you're right, insurance does not cover it, which is problematic. And the availability of them is difficult. Some of it also has to do with the way their paradigm is, where you've got to buy a package of treatments and you've got to buy 20 treatments or 40 treatments or whatever, whereas other providers, because of COVID, learned how to do things remotely. And so some of it's an industry issue for them in terms of why insurers may shy away from it. But I think there's absolutely no question that it's valuable. And it certainly is something that needs to be figured out.
I also have a handful of women right now with persistent post-concussive symptoms that are somewhere between their early 40s to late 50s. And I started dabbling a little bit in the research. It doesn't seem like there's a ton, but the little bits that I'm finding, they are a prevalent group that not a lot of research has been done on. So some of the theories, I think, have to do with maybe different, whether they're going through menopause and hormonal fluctuations, and could those things be affecting how well their brain can heal? I was curious if you had any information on that population.
There's a little bit of information studying women, and especially in groups that look at interpersonal violence. And there's a group called Pink Concussions. Have you heard of that? And that would be a place to contact to see. They've published and talked a lot about we need to study women, for sure.
From a practical standpoint, one of the most common difficulties that you encounter are difficulties with sleep. The four cornerstones are restorative sleep, adequate hydration, nutrition, and exercise. And so if you're waking up with a hot flash or something of that nature, that's going to disrupt your sleep. Zyrtec, believe it or not, helps with that. Go figure. Go figure. Go figure. Yes. Oncology friend of mine who takes care of a lot of women told me that. I've tried it with patients, and go figure, it makes a difference. So that could be one of the issues going on. Also, a change in weight. You also need to look at thyroid levels, because that's another thing that happens in your 40s, especially when you're going through that. And also, that 23% of individuals with mild TBI will develop an anterior pituitary dysfunction, thyroid dysfunction, growth hormone dysfunction, gonadotropin dysfunction, cortisol dysfunction. So you need to check those as well in that population that are not advancing or not doing well.
I recommended that they get an endocrine panel to try to take a look at
Bingo.
those things. And believe it or not, their endocrinologist had no idea. They were like, why
Yeah. Well, the best thing to do is if you go to NICO, to the military center, they actually have circulars, and when it comes from the government, and they're here to help you. No, when it comes from the government, and there's it's referenced. Sometimes it makes people a little bit more willing.
Hi, I'm Jen Baez. I'm a nurse practitioner. I work in a pediatric emergency room and a concussion clinic. I just wanted to comment on what you had just said about vision therapy. I know there's an optometrist in here who does vision therapy, but one thing that we found that was really helpful in our clinic, and I'm not comparing this to what you do in your office, but we have occupational therapists who, one girl in particular, she had trained with vision therapy for years. So when she came to us, she was able to offer vision therapy. And it is covered under insurance because it's occupational therapy. And she has been then able to train some others. And it is not, she can have somebody for weeks or months. She does refer out when it becomes further, but sometimes there's some basic therapies that she can start. And a lot of the acute patients, sometimes they just need that to start, and then they can improve. So it can save the cost, and sometimes it's right in your clinic, so it's something to think about. Maybe I can get you in contact with her, and maybe she can talk about how that happens. Oh, what I was gonna. There's an occupational therapist, and I can, if there's going to be a group sharing, or I can during the break give you her contact information. I'll send her a text to tell her I'm going to be sending her name. But she's trained with vision therapists, and so then has the skills as an occupational therapist to start those in our clinic under an occupational therapy code. Yeah. I think. I'm not sure of the code.
There's actually an online training module that can be done with a certification for OT. One of our OTs is going through that right now. And many insurance policies will pay for pediatrics where they won't pay for adults because they'll see it as a developmental issue. So you can sometimes get in under that wire.
And then a thought maybe in the future is also training, maybe having some time to train with the optometrist or the specialist to make sure, just a thought, that you're doing the right things.
Hi, good morning. I'm Lauren Schwabish. I'm a speech-language pathologist, and I have a private practice here in Northern Virginia where I'm seeing a lot of those persistent post-concussion syndrome clients. A lot of them are finding me sometimes a year, 2 years after they've been injured, where they never saw a speech pathologist. And one of the things they'll tell me is, well, they told me about this app. I've got, these computer games. So I'm curious to know from the specialists here, because I find doing a lot of sort of review of our speech pathology research in terms of the metacognitive strategy training and education and kind of combating this perception, which I think is out there, that brain games, memory games, apps are really the key to success. And of course, when clients have professional needs, we sort of have to say, well, does that help you with return to your job, with your function? So I'm curious to know from the esteemed panel here today, your thoughts on brain training games.
I think I'm the only speech pathologist on the panel. Oh, yes. But one of the things that we talked about at a conference is communication. It's never evaluated. And it used to be in the 80s when I first started in the field. We did that. And that's contributing to a lot of behaviors that are getting people in trouble. I can tell you that. So we're working on it. There are instruments out there. You're right, it needs to be assessed to see, is that why they're having trouble? And I recently had coffee with a young man who I worked with 15, 20 years ago, and he asked to see me because he's been kicked out of multiple programs. And I said, why do you think you're kicked out? And he couldn't communicate it, so he threw a spoon across the coffee shop. And I went, oh, I see you're frustrated. Luckily, he missed my head. But it's really important, and I think as a field, we need to advocate to look at communication and look at cognition and why do we work on both? So that's a point. It's coming out more in the literature. Actually, it's coming out more from European literature than it is from U.S. literature, from what I've seen.
Australia?
Yeah, Australia, the UK, they're talking more and more about the importance of looking into that. We still need to do research, though, on interventions and what's working.
It comes back to the fact of individualization. You know, I mean, great that you've got an app, great that they can do things that they can practice, but unless you're getting the two-way feedback, unless you can do the subtle nuance, unless you can talk about prosody, unless you can really work at word, I mean, you can't do psychotherapy with an app, you can't do cognitive therapy with an app to the fullness of what you need. It's a fallacy. But a lot of people are making money from it.
Yes, unfortunately.
So I've got a few questions. Shayna, hi. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your family history with Alzheimer's and dementia. Clearly, that's also a growing field and something that many of us are experiencing with aging parents, grandparents, et cetera. Can you share a little bit about the work that you're doing around testing, what you might be learning that is applicable to this variety of diseases that impact the brain, and what other technologies might be out there that we should know about?
Yeah, for sure. So Impact specifically, we are known in the world as the sports concussion guys. We always are that baselining post-injury testing that's specifically focused on sports world. However, we have developed our cognitive impairment screener, and that is really being used to see the cognitive changes for COVID-19, Alzheimer's, and other brain injuries of that nature. So we are pretty much putting that out into the market to be a resource to kind of compile that normative data that we're really known for, to get that out to other organizations. We're really focusing right now on our partnerships and our sponsorships. So we can have organizations like BIS and others like BIAA, the International Brain Injury Association. We're really working with them to see if there's a way to integrate our knowledge and our normative database into what they're already putting out into the world.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Robin.
Yes, ma'am.
So I mentioned earlier that I was at this NASHIA conference, a lot of talk about trauma, a lot of talk about incarceration. Here's a statistic that I heard, and I want your take on it.
Okay.
Statistic was shared that said that 60.25% of the justice population has a history of TBI versus 8.5% of the general population. That's staggering.
It is. My statistics show up to 87%.
Even more staggering.
Yes.
What do you do about that?
What do we do about it? Well, most of the men and women, once they're incarcerated, they do for long periods of time. They do go through trauma, fights and things like that causes them that they just take for granted because that's just the prison life. You fight, you defend, you protect yourself. So I think it's very important once these men and women get home, and now that we are working with you all in a sense with Department of Corrections, to recognize those on the inside who have suffered TBIs, and once they are back in the free world, to work with them on becoming better and doing better and getting the treatment that they need. But it is a very high number.
Do screenings help? Should there be screenings in our justice system?
Absolutely. There should be screenings, and hopefully we can start this program soon, going into Alexandra Detention Center, Arlington Detention Center, and working with the men and women who have been diagnosed, because every prison or jail has a psychologist. So they can be seen, and working with Dawn and her team, we can hopefully determine who needs the help while still on the inside, and then once they are free.
Thank you very much for that. Yes.
Sorry. So I've been talking to people across the country in different states in the justice system, and New York State and Delaware, they contacted me, the healthcare providers, to tell me if someone has a TBI in the system, they cannot get them care. They want to know how to do it. So I'll tell them about you. But they really are worried about these kids. 1-800 call Robin Bell, because they can't get them care because they're coming from the justice system, and healthcare centers don't want to take them in or come into the system to help them. So the lady in New York told me, she's a nurse. She said, we kind of just started reading up how to help these people, and we're doing it ourselves. They cannot get care for people.
We need people like Donna and her team that's willing to go inside the jails and the prisons and to train the people on the inside to determine who has TBIs. And then once they come out, they have people like me and people like Donna who can work with them. So it's possible, more possible with the feds opposed to the state prison. So
I guess my question's for John, because John, you serve on the Virginia TBI task force, right? Did you say that? No? Oh, the Brain Injury Task Force. The Brain Injury Council. So, in the state TBI grants, there's a requirement for cross-systems issues. And so it'd be interesting to look at how many states have the justice system at that table. And maybe Juliet. But Robin, it would be it'd be an interesting question to look, and where the justice system is not at the table, how do they get to the table? So ACL, the Administration for Community Living, is now the administration that implements the TBI grant program, and I think it's a great...
Virginia is one of the grantees, so we should absolutely be engaging and looking at answering that. Kelly is in the back here.
There is a seat on the Virginia Brain Injury Advisory Council with the Department of Corrections.
Excellent. We're getting it done. We're going to make it happen.
This is why we come together, right?
Absolutely. Learn from one another. Dr. Oshanik.
Yes, ma'am.
When you and I spoke, along with Andrew, a week or so ago, you raised something that kind of made us go, what the heck? And I need you to talk about this today. So the topic was something new that apparently has gone viral, particularly with young people, but adults too, called power slapping. Anybody heard about power slapping? Okay, it frightened the heck out of us. Can you talk a little bit about what it is and what it means and why I have brought it up in this conversation?
Sure. Week before classes started at Fairfax County Public Schools, I am sitting in the kitchen with my 12-year-old grandson, who is a rising middle schooler here. And I had just been quoted in a piece in the New York Times because the state of Nevada, the state of Florida, and the state of Texas had all legalized the sport, and I use that term very loosely, of power slap. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's where two humans stand at a table and the offensive human winds up and proceeds to take a full force swing, smacking the receiving human on the side of the face. The receiving human is not allowed to duck, move, recoil, do anything in a defensive way. And depending on the rules, it can be 3 hits or 5 hits. And the total object of this is to either knock them out, make them dazed, knock them to the floor, etc. Apparently this started in Eastern Europe. There are like 130 million hits on Instagram. So there I am with my 12-year-old grandson, and I said, John, what do you know about power slap and slap fighting? Is that something that you've heard about up here? And he turned about that shade. And I said, John, you know that that's pretty dangerous. And he got up, ran out of the room. I composed myself because I was like, Went in. Long story short, yeah, it's happening. It is happening. It's happening in bathrooms. It's happening behind schools. It's happening outside in fields. And it is occurring as a contest. You know, we used to do hot hands where you hold your hands here and people smack the hands and whoever moved was the loser. But the only purpose for this is to knock somebody out, knock them to the ground, make them dazed, disoriented, confused. There was recently a study published in the Journal of Surgery, JAMA Journal of Surgery, that the folks at Pittsburgh, it wasn't Mickey, but it was the neurosurgeons that work with him. The folks at Pittsburgh looked at 70 videos of this occurring, and 78% of the people clearly had evidence on videos of having concussions, traumatic brain injuries, either by posturing or whatever. And, you know, the diagnostic criteria from CDC, blunt force trauma to the head followed by a neurologic change, period. If we were doing this to a dog, if we were doing this to an animal, PETA would be all over it. This is just
Thank you for
disgusting.
sharing that. It's frightening. And John, I'm just curious, you know, you talked about this need, education, right? How do we talk to parents? How do we talk to the kids? How do we connect educators and physicians? Has this come up in your world in the school system?
This specific example, activity,
Power slapping. This activity,
not
yes.
not in the Office of Student Activities and Athletics Programs.
Well, no.
No, not specifically. It would not surprise me that this is occurring. We're such a huge entity, and yeah, it's absolutely very concerning. I have seen the videos on YouTube. I am vaguely aware of what this is. I struggle with the knowledge, the intent that this is something people choose to do, but it is. So I don't know how to answer your question per se. I mean, I think that we strive to provide a general awareness within our students, certainly of signs and symptoms and so on. I would hope that some percentage of kids would be able to sort of recognize that this is not a good thing, because it's pretty easy, to your point, it's pretty easy to see that there's an impact to an individual from a symptomatic standpoint that would point towards concussion or something more significant.
I think the concern, one of the concerns from a medical standpoint and psychological, is A, bullying, people being coerced into it, B, individuals that are engaged in this and then they go on to a sports practice and they get injured or have an impact, and it's a multiplying effect for which the coaching staff is unaware, and how that then expands the nature of the injury. Or C, they're in the recovery phase of their concussion, and for whatever reason, they get engaged in something like this, and it's further detrimental. So it is clearly something that is out there, clearly something that needs to be addressed, I think, in a proactive way, personally.
Last question quickly, because this is called the lightning round. Okay?
Okay. You know,
Lightning
well, you're the lightning.
I'm the lightning rod. That's
You're the
what
lightning rod.
What one thing do you want our audience here today to remember and share with others from this discussion?
You check to say something?
What I said in the slide: recognize, monitor, and care.
That it basically is a developmental process that influences further development, and that's the model we need to keep in mind.
Encourage families to work with teachers and counselors to develop plans to support that student's return to school, that looks at assignments, that looks at what's on the table and make some determinations between what are essential items for developing and demonstrating mastery of content and knowledge versus things that are not as critical and could be put aside. Kids that feel overwhelmed by the mass of work. Most kids really do want to try to do the right thing. They really do want to be, accountable to their work. If they get overwhelmed, if there's things we can do to take that off the table, it greatly facilitates their participation and ultimately their recovery.
Specifically for post-injury testing, making sure that there is that one-to-one comparison and making sure that we can have that individualized care, making sure that as you're taking a post-injury, comparing it to either normative data or baselining, making sure that you have that consistency of care across times.
95% of inmates do return to society. Only 5% never come back. Those that come back, they are coming back into our cities, our communities, so we should do everything that we can to help those that want to be helped.
That's great. Advocate and educate about the resources, tools, and rights of people with disabilities, both on the healthcare provider side, thank you for being here, on the employer side, and individuals themselves who are impacted by brain injury. So thank you.
Let's give a round of applause to our panel. Okay, I think this is done. So here's what's going to happen next. We are going to take a quick break, about 10 to 15 minutes. We have restrooms are out to your right. We have some things to drink and eat in the room across the hall. When we reconvene, we're going to break up into two groups. You have a number on your name tag. If you have a number 1 or a number 4, you're going to be in the same group, and you're going to be behind this air wall for that discussion group. And if you are a 2 or a 3, you're going to be in the room where the refreshments are. So we're going to take a little time in those groups to have some questions and answers, small group, come out with some thoughts. And then when we come back to this room, we're going to kind of take the pulse of what we've heard, what we've learned, and where we might need to go from there as we wrap up. So enjoy a quick break. Thank you so much.
I've seen what's going on there. I'm excited about it. But again, when I sent one of my clients, again, on the computer all day long with vision issues, to the neurooptometrist, who was then wonderful, and saw her, and then sent me a letter and said, here's what's going on, and the recommendations for her, which were reinforcing what I was talking about with her pacing. So it was like, wow. And that was, I gave him a hug when I saw him. I was like, thank you. But
who is this?
I was like, why is this letter?
There's a lot I know that has changed since our last
So then I did that because they're into prevention, and now I got money. We have written some messages for pediatricians to give to parents.
I wrote your email down. Yeah.
I'll try to be very that's okay. Yeah, little points is fine. Got it. All right, the first question is, how can awareness and education about concussions and concussion recovery be increased for healthcare providers, schools, employers, parents, and the community? And then underneath that, it says, who are the key stakeholders who need to be involved in these efforts? Who needs information, can do information review, distribution of materials and tools, etc. And how can more education and training decrease the stigma associated with concussion and concussion recovery? That's a lot in one question. So we could break that down a bit if it's easier to just maybe start with how can awareness and education about concussions and concussion recovery be increased? Or a multitude of, like you guys represent lots of different professions, things that you do, the way you interact with people who experience concussion. So maybe to think first about what do you have access to already versus think about times when you're like, I wonder, is there a study on that? Is there some research data on that? Is there
So Donna, I just want to reflect on something, John, you said on the panel. and you mentioned BCI and the community concussion initiative. One thing that, when we're doing research, and I'm Tracy, by the way, helping with this project, but there are a lot of resources here. And some of them we just may not know about. So I think one of the things when we say increase, maybe is increase awareness of existing resources and programs. But I think many of you are probably aware of the Virginia Concussion Initiative through George Mason University, but they put out a lot of resources. And making people aware of what exists now for providers, for teachers, for parents, because they target all of those groups. Just one thought.
Yeah, and one thing on that group, I'm just a contributor with that group, but once a month, if you don't know about it, once a month they have this, it's an hour on a Tuesday at noon. It's the second or third? Second Tuesday, and anybody can, it's a Zoom, but what they do is they have a speaker with a specialist every month, and so they have a vestibular specialist. Coming up next month is a pediatric neurologist, pediatric concussions. They have anxiety and emotions. They have a neuropsychologist. They actually have emergency action planning in schools. They have concussion, how to improve concussion programs. So it's every month, and they have a professional speaker, and then they have a case, and it's teachers, athletic trainers, nurses, healthcare providers, and so it's an amazing amount of education, and they also present the information on different resources. You get the contact of these specialists who are all willing to answer questions. So just spread the word to your clinics or your schools. It's really, and that's what we're trying to do, is really get as many people involved as possible, so we can all be on the same page and educate the different schools and provide. Virginia Concussion Initiative through George Mason. Okay. It's also CM. It's open to anyone in the community, both practitioners and
The genesis of that group really was, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's compile a lot of useful information, figure out where there's gaps. If there are gaps and we can fill those gaps, let's try to fill them. And so filling them by the development of specific resources and targeted resources to family, medical, school, those types of groups has been one focus. And then the other part of what you were just describing is turning that around and sharing that information, both through these kind of, sort of free once a month sort of informational sessions, but they'll also do more targeted work, say with a school division, right, that wants to evaluate their concussion management, whatever. I've been part of 2 different projects that have been focused on bringing resources together to support a school who's trying to develop better plans. I think one of the challenges is that resource availability across the state varies considerably. So the notion that there's a concussion specialist around the corner that we can talk to in this area is probably true. But if we go past Roanoke, good luck, right? So that's the other part of what they're trying to do, is just help to partner, more remote parts or less resourced parts of the state with access to at least someone they can talk to, bounce ideas off of, and that kind of thing. So,
how is the information accessed from that project? I mean, do you have to go online to a specific website? Do you have to?
It's through their website.
Has there been any consideration given to developing an app so that it could be kept on a provider's phone, and then the provider merely needs to hit the app, then you've got a menu, and then you can, boom, hit it right there in real time?
The short answer is yes. I know there's been discussion and consideration of trying to come up with an app, whether it would match what you just described, or I don't know exactly where that went, or if they were able to find the partners to really facilitate it at the time it came up. So I don't know where that stands right now.
Because the 2 things as a physician, and I'm not sure what your experience is, but time is really critical, and making it stupid easy for us to access, and having our phones and boom, being able just to go there. The second thing that really makes it easy, there's an app called Up to Date, which is a medical information app, and every time you look something up, you get a CME credit. And if there was some way to link that same type of thing with an initiative like this, it reinforces individuals looking things up, even multiple times, and whether it's a CEU, a CME, whatever it is, to then be able to reinforce the use. That could be really a powerful way of getting people to go there. And, you know, I mean, okay, maybe there's a charge, maybe there's not a charge, maybe there's a way of getting grant funding, maybe there's a way of getting Innova or somebody else to underwrite it, or, you know, various hospital systems to underwrite it, or United Healthcare to underwrite it, or something of that nature. But the convenience factor and the reinforcement factor, I think, from a use component might be worthwhile.
Jump in. On that note, we met yesterday as our concussion team, and one of the struggles that we come across is the primary care physician knowing enough about concussion and who to refer to, because I think they just kind of write something out to whoever, you know, PT, but that may not be the appropriate referral at the time. So we started thinking, like, how do we help educate these primary care physicians? That's who people go to first. That's the gatekeeper of their healthcare, really. But they have very little time. And like you said, they see people 10 to 15 minutes. So how do we work within the confines of what we have to provide education and increase the appropriate referrals? As a physician we are lucky that we get to see people for 40 to 45 minutes for weeks and maybe even months on end, whereas you all may not have that time. How do we help bridge that gap?
Well, I do, because I've set my clinic up that way.
Okay.
But the reality is, yeah, I mean, how do you create that? And it's not, you're not going to do it by having, you know, paper referral slips, because those are too cumbersome. Everybody's using electronic medical records, so you've got to have something that'll integrate, or something that's easy for them, and like, you know, an app kind of thing that they can just pull up, or their MA can pull up, or their scribe can pull up, or something of that nature, to make it easier. Like a preferred provider for
like an epic pop-up window. So as soon as they put a diagnosis code of concussion, they get information.
Precisely. Yeah.
That says OT may help this patient with blah, 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 PT may help with.
Exactly.
Or even, did they have a fall? Did they hit their head? Then refer to speech or whatever.
One thing that's helped with at our hospital system, I'm at Loudon Hospital, smaller hospital, but when we have our medical staff meetings every 3 months with all the local pediatricians, I'll go on and talk a little bit about concussion, when they can refer, and how we can help them. And so if you have in your hospital system, your medical staff, like when they do their talks, if they can have somebody to represent your clinic, and the more we do that, then they know, and you know, we say you can, if you want to take care of them, but we're here if they're not getting better, or if you want to refer them right away, because we have an hour, not 15 minutes. And then from our ERs, we send the referrals to the different clinics in the area. And so the concussion clinics, so then the parents know and they spread the word.
So I see a little bit of an issue with any type of app or anything that's integrated into your electronic health records, is that is primarily within the medical community. And if we're really trying to break down those barriers to get education involved, or like a community service like brain injury services, you know, like how do we try and amass something that's accessible to everybody? And so one thought, you know, in terms of like following kind of the app idea, is looking at artificial intelligence and creating a knowledge base where you feed it the information. So we can feed it all of what we already have. We can feed it our brochures, we can feed it our presentations, we can feed it the notes from this conference. And then what you do is it's a dialogue. So you could have the dialogue with the AI and say, hey, this is what I'm searching for. What options can you come up with for me? And it could spit out something for you and ask you for clarifying questions. And it's like, do you need this or do you need that? But developing something like that would take an immense amount of work. But it would be something that if you create a database like that, that's basically indexed and run through an AI. The AI has access to all of that information, and then you can actually assign the AI different personas. So you could ask the AI, I want you to be somebody who is very good at speaking with a caregiver. So use plain language and give very short, to the point details. Or I want you to pretend that you're an expert in brain injury, speaking with medical providers. Please provide citations of all your data that you're going to give us. You can script and assign it different roles depending on what you want or what you need.
It is fascinating. I was very hesitant because I'm always like, technology, I don't know. And my husband is working a lot with this right now. And he sat me down and he's doing a lot of stuff that I'm researching. Saved me hours of time. And he kept talking like, oh, and you take on this persona. And I was like, I'm not sure what's happening to you. Are you changing? You are now personifying your computer. Lord. And sure enough, it would spit out things that I was in awe. So I'm still a little nervous about what I don't know, but I think you're spot on.
I think recovery is important because people have to know that you do, it's a thing that can recover, right? So I think that you have to pace that, but also obviously prevention is important too. Some people are doing that prevention in that sports rehab space. It's the long road of saying, hey, this is what concussion can look like 2 months after it happens, right? Like you're saying, watch them closely. Well, what are they watching for, right? What did you feel, right? How did you know to say, I need services, right? So I think some of it is, we look at prevention and recovery, but the recovery space I think needs more of our attention because we are the people in that space.
And also back to the stigma, I work mainly with older adults, and a lot of the stigma comes from like what they feel are like the dumb injuries, like we heard in the first story of just hitting your head, walking down the stairs, or like my dad got his concussion in a U-Haul, just standing up, hitting it. My aunt on a dresser drawer, like really injuries people don't want to admit to because they feel dumb.
You have to basically socialize, like everybody hits their head on a beam or falls, or like it's not
just
it's not because you're older and like feeble. It's like this is just happening. Like let's just talk about
this. We just
this.
hit our heads sometimes.
Yeah.
But especially for the older adult, that's going to tip into independence,
Yeah.
right?
So
What does that
like,
aging process look like?
The 80s and up, a lot of times they don't want to admit to a head injury because then their families worry, their doctors worry. It's a whole cascade. They might lose it's an ED visit, there's bleeding risk. So I think there's there's like the younger, middle-aged, younger, older adult where feeling stupid, hitting their head, and then the older adult not wanting to lose independence.
And I think it's also what I discovered is quality of life. The way that I frame it with the reframe brain, the way I talk about it is really because we live in such a fast-paced world, everything is go, 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 go. So when I'm talking with people about resting, napping, no matter what age you are, that is not age specific, that people start taking naps, that is not age specific, that people turn the volume down on the television, that is not like way up or turn it, like all of those types of things. It's about quality of life. So perhaps if the conversation could also be about, well, what do you want life to look like?
There's too much of this connection that concussion is a football issue. The champion who's a cheerleader, would be phenomenal. A champion who is a golfer, who is a swimmer, swim and dive. I mean,
equestrian.
And sure, anything else but football. But looking for champions in other areas of athletics, or even within the military. Well, I mean, would be a huge thing. Outside, sure.
Firefighters.
Sure, absolutely.
Or any first responder.
Yes, it just reinforces the fact that concussion is not limited to any one group or population, right? It's, again, they get the attention, but at the end of the day, they're not the only ones who are navigating this. That helps at the school level too, but sorry, just to say, because too often within a school environment, concussion is deposited in special ed
or athletics.
Right.
When the reality is it is neither an athletic nor a special ed issue.
Right.
It is something that affects the entire student population, but it doesn't get enough attention from that general education perspective, unfortunately. Sorry, I got you.
No, I was thinking about what you said about, everybody knows that smoking is bad. And just thinking about the trajectory and the timeline of how long it has taken to get people to understand that smoking is bad. And then the next layer of that is that, oh, vaping is bad too, right? And how that, just in general, public health messaging, I think is a challenge because there's so many things that are a danger to us, and there's so many things that like parents have to be aware of, or that we as individuals have to be aware of, that this could end up being very serious. But I almost feel like sometimes it's just like shouting into an echo chamber, right? Like how loud can you be to get somebody's attention for them to hopefully recall in the future that, potentially something is serious or something is dangerous. I feel like we're still fighting that fight with mental health. Like, okay, like don't ignore the symptoms and signs. Looking at what other public health initiatives have done, is that something that maybe we need to partner more with, I don't know, like maybe partnering about just like, don't ignore the small stuff, like when something happens, you need to go talk to somebody, is that something that we could unite with? Because in general, there's such a variety of symptoms that could be happening to indicate a concussion that I'm not so sure that our messaging is going to ever be as simple as don't smoke. And even saying don't smoke has taken, over half a decade to become pretty salient. So I kind of wonder what's realistic in terms for us and our messaging out there, and what's really going to get heard and remembered by people.
I was reading a really cool book on behavior change, and they looked at the how to get teenagers to not start smoking to begin with. And one of the most powerful campaigns was a representative, I'm pretty sure in Florida, who finally got so frustrated because he felt like he was not making any progress with all the things we thought they needed to hear, that finally said, I'm going to bring all these teenagers together and ask them what works for them and what do they know. And what ended up coming out of it was they took action when they knew they were being controlled. So when they realized the tobacco industry is controlling you, they're like, ooh, I don't want to be controlled. And so then smoking became less, I guess, they didn't want to do it as much because they realized it's not my choice, it's something controlling me. And so it really made me think about how do you spin a message? You just never know what is going to click with different populations, and you have to come up with a different message for each population, because what's going to speak to the 65 plus community who has the highest number of falls is completely different than what's going to click with the parent or the teenager or whatever. So I don't think there's a cookie cutter response to it. I think we have to tackle each population differently.
Sarah, what you were saying kind of prompted me to think about this. We really don't, Donna, as you're thinking about who are the champions, we need a public health champion for this, just like there's a public health champion. And Surgeon General is going to talk about, they've talked about smoking for years. He's talked about loneliness epidemic. So there are certain things that can be brought to the forefront. I think we need a public health champion. Take the work that the CDC Heads Up campaign did for 10 years. Right. What were the results? Where are the gaps, and try and lift that up, but also to really recognize it as a public health issue.
I wonder if that is something that the Surgeon General would have interest in.
We don't know, but I'm sure there's any number of issues, but
if Alzheimer's and dementia is becoming a bigger thing, why not make it like a brain health? Because a lot of the research is coming from Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and sleep. If you sleep, you decrease the amount of plaque, plaque buildup over time, all these little details that you learn. And we use a lot of that research in concussion education, and when we're telling how much sleep you need to eat, you need to do this, the exercise, all these things that are basic, good things to do in your life. And so if it's going to prevent Alzheimer's, can it help you heal from a concussion? Can we make it like if we have a public health champion, can they just take on brain health, where you can put in
I don't think anybody will take on just brain injury or concussion, but if you add it to Alzheimer's and dementia as different pockets in that area, maybe that would be something we could get past and get people interested in.
I'm glad you brought that up. We had hoped to have a speaker today from US Aging. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to come, but to talk about this issue of falls and dementia, all these other things that start to happen later in life. And I think that you're right, and that's a great partnership to be looking at this across the entire age spectrum of our youngest children and what they encounter, people in growing up years and midlife years, and then the older population, because the older population is the population that has boomed in numbers. So they really drive a lot of the resources right now and a lot of the thinking right now. The Administration for Community Living, ACL, which has the TBI grants under it, they're well aware of that. They are representing both disability population and the senior population. So they've been working for quite some time to bring a lot of discussions together. So I think that's a really
if you could
smart
affect
thought
sleep, I
process.
know there's always talk on sleep, but if you can get the parents to understand how much sleep a kid needs, you could cut your mental health issues in teenagers down, right, by 30%, 40%, 50%. If these kids go to bed at 11 versus 3 o'clock on their phones. So it would just not get concussion, it would just get so many different other health issues that our kids are having.
If it could help with societal influence, that would help too, because I feel like so many of my patients say, well, I'd love to, but I have sports after school, and then I have homework, and then I have a job and I have kids, and I can't get the sleep that I need. Or when they do try, because of the brain injury, they can't sleep. They don't get quality sleep. So it's such a hard, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? How do you help prioritize these things?
I'm going to show my age, but there was a commercial, and anyone else who remembers this commercial, This Is Your Brain.
Oh, yes, this is your brain on This is your brain on Earth. Yep. Ad council.
Commercials
Brilliant
are
work, right?
10-second clip. Everyone.
But where would you put it? Nobody listens to commercials. That's
Football games, Super Bowl.
Well, these commercials, right? Or these days it goes on social media.
Yeah.
One thing that I have looked for, and it's not available, is a concrete list of resources. And if you go to 2hrs, they'll tell you it's no open door, which is a bunch of nothing.
Right.
I
mean, no closed door.
No closed door.
It's actually no
no
open
door.
door. In actuality, no, I'm saying like it's,
Yeah.
right, should be, right.
So there is, I have searched high and low, and there is no place to go where there is a list of all these resources that you can tap into. And some of them are going to be by state, and some of them are going to be, nationwide. But if there was some way, and I would be very happy to volunteer to help put the list together, but some place where people could go to say, oh, I didn't think of contacting an OT. Like some people would think, oh, OT is only for, hand, fine motor.
There's so much misunderstanding.
But there's misunderstanding of which, group could help when you're having certain problems. And also if you could do like, in an ideal world, a search, and then you have, all these other options could come up. Because I think that is really what people are looking for too. I mean, we talk about neurologists, I'm constantly looking for neurologists.
But imagine the person who goes to the ED. Maybe they actually they hit their head. They go to the ED. They're not going to stay. They're not going to enter the healthcare system. And whoever it is can throw them this card with a QR code. The QR code goes to this online resource list they could search and maybe have some educational videos like, hey, are your symptoms persisting? Right? Has it been 2 weeks and you're still not feeling good? Here's what, some educational opportunities. But these resources are oftentimes, if you can get a list, it's outdated.
Yeah.
Providers don't exist anymore. So like, how could we keep it current? And then how could we keep the conversation ongoing? So you're saying like, this shouldn't be a once.
Correct.
This should be a regular gathering to go,
Right.
guys, wait, you just said this. Let's make sure this flows through the system.
So
Okay, I think we're at that point where we are going to come back together here for a little conversation and kind of reporting out of the small group conversations. Who was in the conversation that was in the room right behind us? Raise your hand. And who was in the conversation across the hall? Okay, great. So kind of split evenly. That's good. I know we lost some people who had to get on their way. So what we'd like to do, did each group, I know you are I can't speak now. You are our reporter, and who is the reporter from the group that met across the hall? Julie. Fantastic. She's already, I thought she was just the writer. I didn't realize you were the actual reporter. So, Julie, do you want to start and give the report of what your group talked about and whatever you want? If you're okay with that.
Okay. So, I'm a very visual person who has to write notes in a visual way. So I will report out that we identified a bunch of stakeholders, as we were supposed to do, and then we basically tried to organize, like, what are the broad messages that these stakeholders need to hear. We talked about actions, and then we tried to catalog resources as we were supposed to do in the discussion guide. So I don't have the resources listed here, but we do have a list of them. So, can you remind me what the first question was?
How can awareness and education about concussions and concussion recovery be increased for healthcare providers, schools, employers, parents, and community?
Okay. So, we talked about essentially a few different things, but one of the big takeaways was that this kind of convening of these different stakeholder audiences that come from the healthcare sector, that come from the service provision sector, that come from education, that there needs to be an ongoing conversation, and Lauren called it a collective, because what we really discovered around the table was, oh yeah, this needs to happen. Oh, did you know this is happening? Oh, we should make sure that people know that this resource exists, so that there needs to be this ongoing conversation, not just an annual summit, but a collective that stood up that can do this in an ongoing way. And then there were specific actions that people talked about as well. There needs to be the utilization of social media, really short messages. They really also need to hit the mom community in particular. And we outlined some resources that do exist for parents and moms, but we really talked about, like, because moms are gatekeepers so often, that we need targeted resources for them. And then we also talked about an action, which is creating QR code handouts that would be given out in the healthcare setting, in the emergency department, at PCPs, even in the neurology offices, so people could know, okay, here's some ongoing set of resources and kind of a checklist that people would use to really check their own symptoms. So one of the big conversations that I think that happened at the panel and then in our room was, we need to create tools and normalize that people need to be asked diagnostic type questions, because the recovery journey is a long one and the trajectory is not clear. So healthcare providers themselves need to be given some tools, and parents and others need to be given tools to really draw out the symptoms and let people understand, okay, then you should probably see someone and get some support. I was covering a lot of the questions in that one. But what's the second question?
What existing tools, resources, organizations should be leveraged more broadly to address concussion recovery and general?
Okay, so we talked about, just in terms of education of folks, we talked about Brainline, support group around concussions that occur with the National Aphasia Organization. Lauren got that mention in there. The National Association of State Head Injuries has many resources on its website. BIAA, Parents Helping Parents, parent to parent, ARC of Northern Virginia, special education advisory councils, and we also talked about the Concussion Legacy Foundation. Did I forget anything, group?
What was that last one you just said?
The Concussion Legacy Foundation. So we also earlier in the day talked about the resource of Pink Concussion. And I know that Julia talked also about a checklist that is coming out, that CDC is putting out. And will that be for pediatricians?
Well, there is a checklist for healthcare providers on our website now.
Okay.
It's for healthcare providers.
Okay. The next question was?
Last one is, what is important for local and state leaders to know or do about concussion recovery?
Okay. So this is where essentially we talked about broad messages have to get communicated across all sectors. We talked about that on the panel, and we talked about it in our littler room, which was all injuries are different. Trust your gut. If you think something's wrong, don't just let a healthcare provider push you aside. Understand that that it's a chronic condition. The recovery journey is a long journey. Watch for behavior changes. And then we talked also about destigmatizing, and we talked about the idea that we have to communicate, hey, this could happen to anyone. You should not feel embarrassed to report it. You should not feel ashamed. It's not always a sports injury. We talked about the specific, distinct older adult population feeling even more stigmatized to feel like, well, if I say something, then my autonomy could be taken away. So we kind of named that there needs to be extra focus on older people in terms of messaging to them. And then we talked about the need for the healthcare community to really get the messages talked about, not at injury, but pre-injury, that people would want to let their patient community know, hey, this could happen to you. I'd like to hear about it. What have I left off, team? Well, everyone had amazing ideas, and really we pushed off for what the panel said. So anyway, if there's anyone who wants to add anything.
The second one to report out. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, it's working. Okay, so we were on this side, and we had some of the same ideas. I'll just go through them. So the first one that we talked about was just increasing awareness of existing programs, not inventing the wheel, because people have done programs and research for a lot of times, over the years. And so somehow having more of like a central location where we have resources for people, medical providers, teachers, et cetera. One that we had talked about was the Virginia Concussion Initiative at George Mason University. So they're trying to focus like monthly education for teachers, parents, educators, groups. It's a free service. There's also like education hours. And the goal of this is also not just for this Northern Virginia community, where I think we're really lucky when you talk to people around the country. We have so many good sources, even if we don't know them on a daily basis, but also in like rural Virginia, in different parts of Virginia, but even just the different states, how we're trying to get resources to areas that may not have what we have up here. So that's one of the programs. And then as you guys were just talking, I was just thinking of the CDC, like the Heads Up. That is such a great resource, and I think a lot of people forget that it's right there. It's been in the works for years and years and years with research, where there's for parents, for athletes, for educators, for providers. We did think of, somebody was talking about, which is fascinating to me, but about like artificial intelligence, a dialogue for resources for medical professionals, where, I'm not going to explain it like the person did, but there's just so much you can do with artificial intelligence these days. We were saying that would be really awesome, but you do also miss
a really important part of the personal interaction, and each person is so different. Yeah, we're missing that, but that's something for the future as it's coming out more and more. Then there were concerns too, like we can educate all of us as healthcare providers, and a lot of us know things, but what about the layperson or the little kids and the teachers at the elementary school level and the parents? And how do we do, like one woman was talking about, like, she's a mom, and she said, yeah, of course my kid can get hit, but she'll be fine. Like, a lot of people aren't really always thinking about what can happen. So just educating, and so we're talking about the education starting at the school level, on the team level. And then also language change, that a concussion is a brain injury, and maybe eliminating the word mild, because a lot of people just think about brain injury or concussion, but not really thinking about a concussion as a brain injury. Quite honestly, I will just admit this now. I've known about the Brain Injury Foundation for a very long time, but I didn't really think of it as a resource for concussion patients. Well, unless they're like really suffering for a long time. But I know I've learned a lot today from being here and just learning more about all the different resources. To me, it sounded more of a significant brain injury when I was, but anyway. Okay, so, one consideration was we were talking about having education, having different resources and different services from different communities, but not the services or the resources we may have in this community may not fit some other communities where they have a different population, different concerns or needs. So really, it is more about customizing to each dynamic culture, each geographic location, which is just another challenge that we have to face. One of the things that we did come up with is that would be a really good idea is having a champion in different areas, different geographic locations, a champion that could head like concussion information. And we were saying maybe not a football player, but maybe bring it out to a cheerleader or a swimmer or a golfer, somebody said, or somebody that was in a car accident. Maybe more normalized that this can happen to other people, not just football or hockey or what people normally think about. And so either getting, somebody said, just somebody in the community who's done some great things or people know about. So using those people as champions in the community. So either like local celebrities. Okay. And then, let's see. So I thought this was a great idea. This was kind of after all of our discussion, but having a public health champion. We were talking about the, what's the name of the Surgeon General, who does, takes different topics and is a champion for that, but maybe doing something like brain health, because we were talking about how Alzheimer's, dementia, different things like that are getting more information, but if you do more of a general brain health where you can bring in concussion information or just sleep, nutrition, exercise, overall brain health, you could get more information out if we could get a champion who has the most impact on the whole state or on different levels. Sorry, I'm just kind of reading through this, but not maybe talking about each question.
Our group spent a lot of time on question 1, and then it sort of bled over a little into the others. I think we also didn't get to question 4. So just keep rolling with it. We're good.
Yeah, so I think that was that was a lot of our discussion, but it was about how to educate into the school system, into the parents, into all the different populations. social media. Oh, yeah, the one good thing you guys said this also, the other group is about a message and about like the 10-second, the snaps on Instagram or TikTok, things like that. We all, a few of us who are my age may remember that commercial. This is your brain on, your brain on drugs, but we still remember to this day. So we mentioned the same thing, messages, quick and easy, that different populations can get from different resources.
That's just checking my notes as well. We also kind of, as part of the messaging, we talked about trying not to promote fear, but to promote good information. Somebody said small to-dos, small ways that you can protect yourself or reach out if, if you are in doubt, sit it out. Those kind of more positive messages could be really impactful, especially for kids and maybe even for seniors as well. When you have kind of those rhyming messages or easy to remember messages, they stick with us better. And so we spent some time just kind of thinking about what some of the terminology could or should be and what it shouldn't be. So we kind of like that idea of coming up with something. Some ideas already exist and others we talked about, but just trying to keep it simple. We talked about, Julie, the phrase you used in your presentation earlier of recognize, monitor, and care. Because we talked specifically about the monitor word, and that's something that really has great impact, particularly with parents, and I think maybe with sports coaches and others, like, something happened, doesn't mean we have to get all alarmed and go running to the ER, but we need to monitor, and then if we see some other signs, then we pick up the phone and make the call for them. Anybody else from that group remember anything that we didn't just highlight?
Donna, there was just, Dr. Upshanek, you made a really great point of, when you have these resources like the UCI, for example, having it on an app on a phone might be really helpful, timely, that they can use that as a real-time resource instead of looking it up on the web, but having an app. I thought that was a good
that was a great idea as well. We all like our little apps these days that can live on our phones.
An app can be a great tool to store more of the information and the resources. If you're, in the moment, I think, especially, if you're a parent, your kid's just been hurt. You're not thinking clearly, right? You're thinking, oh my God, my kid's been hurt. What do I do? And probably all that great knowledge that's in your head has just flown out, right? So having a handy app, I know there are some tools, that are still on paper. I've seen slider things reminding you to do this, do that. That's great, but you're probably not going to have that on you when you're sitting at the game, or your kid was out driving or something happened, but you're going to have your phone on you. So having some kind of reminder of whether it's words like recognize, monitor, care, or any of these other things, to have it on an app could be really beneficial. And I think that led us to talking a little bit also about resources, because something like an app, you need some funding for that. You need somebody who's able to create it. You need a task force of people who will put the ideas together. So that's a number of steps down the line, but I think it's something that is worth exploration. So those were some of the things that we talked about. Thank you so much. Thank you to Julie, and I'm sorry I don't remember your name, Jan, for being the official reporters and capturing all of that. As part of our wrap-up, are there lingering questions, thoughts, or ideas that we still want to capture today before we all leave this room? Are all of our brains tired at this point? It's yes.
I don't have any ideas, but like, I love this. This was such a wonderful day with like incredible providers getting together. So I just want to know, like, how can we keep this going? How can we get these ideas shared? This got me so excited about collaboration and being able to really tell people where to find the best information and make Virginia sort of a superior place to receive care. So I'm, first of all, so grateful to you for setting this out and setting this up and all the work that went into it, but also I'd really like to see what kind of plan can keep us connected, because I think motivation is great, but it's that marathon.
It is a marathon. Thank you for recognizing that. I know probably all of us in this room have gone home from an event like this or a conference all enthused. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And then you get busy again. So you're right. We need a plan. I want to thank Andrew Walensky for so much work that went into today, but it doesn't end here. Andrew and I have already started conversations about where we go next. And some of it is going to be up to you all and what you want to do. I think some of our first steps will be to take back all of this great information and synthesize it. We have some of our amazing staff who are here in the room, and we will all brainstorm. We know who our experts are here, and we again thank all of them for coming as far as from Atlanta, thank you, and nearby as well. And I think that everybody has some enthusiasm for continuing this discussion. Whether we're looking at what kind of testing and how do we keep looking at technology, how do we look at an app, how do we prepare? So I think a big piece of this, once we kind of synthesize through this and figure out what are the categories of things we need to do, we might look at some committees or groups that might get together virtually or in person. I don't want to commit immediately to, we're going to meet every month on this conversation, because we know that that's going to be a disaster, right? We're going to go back, we're going to be busy. But we're going to find maybe the top 2 or 3 things that we feel we can get started on, and then brainstorming on partnerships so that it's not just us sitting in this room. I like, is it you just said about Northern Virginia, all of Virginia, right? We have partners all across the Commonwealth. There are brain injury service providers like BIS all across the state. We need to bring this further. We're going to start this work, but we're looking for partnerships. We are looking to our healthcare community and so many others in the tech industry and elsewhere who I think are going to want a piece of whatever it is we determine we need to do. So I think we're going to come up with maybe 3 to 5 bullet points of things that we can do in the short term, in the intermediate term, and over the long term. And then we can bring that back to you. Any other thoughts, questions, ideas that people want to throw out? Hearing none, I want to thank you all truly for taking time out of your day today. I know some of you, left work, took a day off, took your personal time, whatever it is. That's why we tried to get you out early. It's Friday afternoon. You can get a jump on the traffic. But thank you for sharing your insights, your thoughts, your experience, and your expertise. It meant the world to us, and we look forward to continuing to work with all of you. Thank you so much, and have a great weekend.